thank you very much, Mr. Minister, for joining us. I am curious, obviously, to hear your reaction to anything that Minister Gantz had to say. But for those of you who don't know, you've been deeply involved in the Abraham Accord from the beginning, visited Israel multiple times. Again, from the perspective of people who've been watching the Middle East for a long time, it is still astonishing, the idea that you would have your country and other countries in the Gulf especially would have open relations with Israel. And the large question that I'd love you to answer is, what was the mentality shift in the leadership of Bahrain that allowed you to say, you know what, Israel's in the Middle East and we're going to have relations with it? So maybe you could just start with there.
Thank you, Jeff, and thanks to the Aspen Institute for having me. I'm delighted to be here. And to answer your question, Jeff, I believe Bahrain, under the leadership of His Majesty King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa, and with the support of His Royal Highness Crown Prince and Prime Minister Salman bin Hamad Al Khalifa, has always been advocating for peace and coexistence in the region. And Bahrain has, for centuries, been a successful model of peaceful coexistence, whereby we had Muslims, Christians, Jews, Hindus, Baha'is living side by side for centuries in Bahrain. So why not have this being broader across the region? Israel is part of the region and will remain. Hence, the decision to sign the Abraham Accord and establish bilateral diplomatic relations with Israel requires immense amount of courage. And many were watching with apprehension, some with fear, and others with hatred. And that is why we have been working tirelessly for the past 22 months with our colleagues in Israel. The 30th of September 2020, after the grand ceremony at the White House, whereby the Abraham Accords was signed, I attended a US-sponsored meeting with a number of senior Israeli officials. So we congratulated each other, and they asked me, so, when are we signing the peace treaty? I told them, what peace treaty? They said, you know, the peace treaty between Israel and Bahrain should be signed. I told them, gentlemen, we just signed the Abraham Accords. Why do we need a peace treaty? They said, well, of course, we signed it with Jordan, we signed it with Egypt. We should sign it with Bahrain as well. I told them, please do not look at Bahrain from the same lens. We were never at war. We were never in direct confrontation. We don't share borders. In fact, we will not sign a peace treaty with Israel. To us, this is just a normal bilateral diplomatic relations, and we just sign it with a simple joint communique between the foreign ministers. It took them some time to get that around their head. A few weeks later, they came back and said, well, is it fine if we call it a joint communique to establish bilateral, diplomatic, peaceful, and friendly relations? Said, of course. And it was signed in Bahrain during the first visit of a senior official from Israel, Mr. Meir bin Shabat, the former National Security Advisor. And we have been working very closely, particularly with the Minister of Foreign Affairs, into developing these relations, and it continues to develop.
So no one had briefed the Israelis that they hadn't actually been at war with Bahrain, is what you're saying? They had somehow missed that detail. Bahrain had never participated in a war against Israel as an Arab state.
Well, you must to ask Minister Gantz that question, I believe.
Yeah, for his return to the stage after this, we'll go to that. Talk about this in the same context that I asked Minister Gantz, the context of Iran. Minister Gantz said something interesting. He said that there are several countries in the Middle East that are under equivalent sort of threat from Iran. Does Bahrain feel like it's under an existential threat from Iran and specifically its nuclear program?
Iran, for the past 4 decades, has been acting with impunity with regards to its neighbors, including my country. Bahrain is a peaceful country. It has always called for a peaceful region and coexistence. Iran is an important neighbor in the region, but we would expect Iran to be a responsible member of the international community, meaning it would have to respect its neighbors, respect its borders, and to refrain from interfering in its domestic affairs. In the recent summit hosted in Jeddah, the Security and Development Summit, His Majesty the King specifically stressed the continuous danger of the interference in domestic affairs of other countries in the region being the biggest challenge in the region. So how to address that? Now everybody is following Vienna and the talks in Vienna. But when we speak about the JCPOA, which is a very critical portfolio, I believe it should not be discussed in separate boardrooms that would shy away from mentioning the common threat that the region is facing. October 9th, 2006, the world woke up to the news that North Korea tested its first nuclear weapon. It was a reality that the world still is facing its consequences. What if one day all of us wake up to the news that Iran has tested its first nuclear weapon and face it as a reality? So I believe addressing the issue now, when there is an opportunity, is much better than addressing it later when it's too late.
Do you therefore advocate preemptive military action against Iran to prevent it from going nuclear? And would Bahrain participate in such military action?
We have been following all these developments very carefully. Obviously, dealing with the matter diplomatically would be a priority. We have seen how the Iranian regime is ignoring the current efforts in respecting what it should abide by, but we do believe with the continuous ignorance and the continuous developing of the nuclear program in Iran would cause the region, and it would affect, obviously, its neighbors in a very dramatic manner.
I'll take that as an ambiguous maybe. Is that fair?
Fair enough.
Okay. On the Abraham Accords, the same question that I asked Minister Gantz. This is more personal in a kind of way for you, for the royal family, for UAE. Many Palestinians feel betrayed by the agreement between Israel and the Arab states, an agreement that was made without condition or without a specific promise to bring about the creation of a Palestinian state. Obviously, the climate is very different than 4 decades ago when countries broke relations with Egypt, when Sadat went to Israel. But how do you answer the Palestinian charge that you're more interested in Iran or you're more interested in high-tech business with Israel than you are in bringing about some kind of fair solution for the Palestinians?
Supporting the Palestinians in establishing their own independent state with the east of Jerusalem as its capital has always been in the forefront of Bahrain's foreign policy, supporting in consolidation with our Arab partners under the Arab Peace Initiative, and continues to do so. We continue in Bahrain to enjoy a very strong relation with the Palestinians, and Bahrain would provide any support, anywhere, anytime, to do so. We do believe that establishing relations with Israel does not mean abandoning the Palestinians. In fact, on the contrary, we believe this would enhance all the efforts in reaching that goal. This has been the longest standing item agenda of the UN, 70 plus years. What has been achieved? So we believe that establishing this relation would certainly enhance that, and we continue to coordinate closely on that matter.
Stay on this subject for one more minute. Do you have influence over Hamas?
When you say you, meaning?
Bahrain, not you personally. That would be very interesting, but Bahrain and UAE and some of the more moderate Gulf states. I ask that because if you can move Hamas toward a even slightly more moderate position, you might help break the logjam.
There's a limitation to what Bahrain could do or to what anyone could do to support the Palestinians if they do not support themselves. We would have to see a united Palestinian National Front for them to know what exactly do they want, instead of us looking into, rather than a two-state solution, it looks more like a three-state solution nowadays. So there's the limitation to what could be done from our end in Bahrain, but at the end of the day, whatever the Palestinians agree unanimously to achieve, we are more than glad to support that.
Do you have influence over Israel now? And I ask that for a very specific reason. Let's say, my apologies to Minister Gantz and Prime Minister Lapid, let's say Benjamin Netanyahu comes back into power. He brings a very right-wing settler coalition with him. How do you believe that you, in combination with other Arab states, can move the Israeli government to a moderate position on settlement construction, for instance?
I don't believe it's a matter of influence as much as it is a matter of trust and confidence, which we have been building with Israel for the past 22 months. And I believe with an open channel of communication, with transparency, with openness, this will certainly help us and support us in moving forward in any matter one could imagine. The vision of peace and prosperity is shared both by Israel and Bahrain. And choosing the path of peace towards a more stable and secure region is the way forward. And I believe what has been achieved in the past 22 months between Bahrain and Israel is remarkable. To shed light on a few, we have 32 bilateral visits between Bahrain and Israel. The most notable was the visit of the former Foreign Minister Naftali Bennett and the current Prime Minister Yair Lapid, and the visit of Minister Gantz. Should I say the next?
This is called Bahraini interference in domestic Israeli political affairs, clearly. Something no one expected.
In a way, where he signed a historic defense cooperation MOU with Bahrain, the first of its kind with an Arab country. We have 40 MOUs and agreements in a various scope of fields. And we have interestingly signed a joint war and peace strategy, a 10-year strategy which have identified the way forward with Israel. It has specifically identified areas of interest to develop and deliver tangible results, namely in innovation and technology, trade and investment, food and water security, healthcare, education, tourism, and a couple of others. This was signed on the sidelines of the historic Negev Summit last March, which was an event hosted by Israel and attended by foreign ministers from Bahrain, the US, the UAE, Morocco, and Egypt. It was a gathering of like-minded countries in the region, interested in developing stability and prosperity in the region, and to upscale the level of cooperative coordination in the various fields of areas. And I think it was a step to conceptualize a new regional network. And to enhance that, we hosted just 3 weeks ago in Bahrain the first meeting of the steering committee for the Negev Forum. I had the opportunity to chair the meeting along with my dear colleague Alona Shpiz, the DG of the Israeli MFA, and we had a very fine representation from the US, my dear colleague Yair Lambert from the State Department, where we discussed the framework of the Negev Forum, which I believe would be the next big thing in the region. We have discussed the formation of the Negev Forum, where it will have 4 main bodies, namely an annual ministerial meeting, the presidency, steering committee, formulated by senior officials from the Ministries of Foreign Affairs, and working groups. We have agreed on 6 working groups that would work on delivering tangible results, namely on food and water security, healthcare, education and coexistence, tourism, clean energy, and regional security. So keep an eye open until the next ministerial meeting where bigger announcements would be made.
We have time for 1 or 2 quick questions. Just raise your hand and we'll wait for a mic. Yes, sir, over here. Yeah. Just stand. Could you wait for the mic?
Hi, I'm Harry Kagan. What do you see as the biggest stumbling block going forward for warm and very friendly and enthusiastic relations between Bahrain and Israel? And what's the biggest asset to those kinds of relations going forward?
I'm actually not aware of any stumbling stone moving forward with Israel. In the past 22 months, speaking about Bahrain, matters have been moving smoothly. I'm not only speaking about leadership to leadership, government to government, but also people to people. We have a direct line. Our national carrier Gulf Air flies back and forth. And we look forward into developing further cooperation that would bring our peoples together, whether it's education, whether it's tourism, research, and other matters that we believe that would enhance the bilateral relations. We have found nothing in Israel but openness, enthusiasm, and support from all levels and all across the state of Israel, and we very much appreciate that.
Let me ask you one final question provoked by this question. Your very large neighbor has, according to various reports, warm, constructive, but secret relations with Israel. So speaking of stumbling blocks, what is keeping Saudi Arabia from recognizing Israel and entering into the Abraham Accords? Obviously, the interests on Iran, at least, are shared.
Well, I can't speak on behalf of Saudi Arabia, but in Bahrain, the way we do business is over the table and not under the table. And when we decided in Bahrain to build a relationship with Israel, this is a relationship that we are not shying away from. We are developing it because we truly believe that this is the way forward. We have selected in Bahrain the path of peace and prosperity, and we are fully determined to build on that. Now, mind you, Jeff, all of this happened in the midst of a pandemic. In 22 months. Imagine what would happen in the next 5 years and what would be achieved in the next decade.
That's an unusually hopeful note for a Middle East conversation, but thank you very, very much. I appreciate it. Thank you very much for coming.